online people, thank you for joining us whenever it is. I don't know if you're in your pajamas watching this or what. I don't need to know. But anyway, we're really glad that you are with us too. This is a special weekend, right? This is kind of like the beginning of summer. A lot of people think of it that way, Memorial Day weekend. But it's way more than just, pool parties and get-togethers with family and friends. Hopefully I have more than one, but it's more than all that stuff. It really is a reminder to us of the sacrifice that people made that we could have the freedoms that we have in this country. And so I just hope that as we make it through the weekend, I hope we get to have some fun. Hope we get to see some friends. Hope we get to do some of those things. But along the way, let's not forget those who have given us the privileges that we share in this country. It's also a special weekend because on Sunday night, we are inviting the entire community of churches around us to come and to worship with us. Sunday night, 6 o'clock. Now, we knew it was Memorial Day weekend when we lined this up, but we're trying to be consistent with like the fourth Sunday night of every month, something like that. And so what we're doing at 6 o'clock is we have different churches coming in, different bands coming in from different churches. Our band's going to be helping lead worship, and it's really literally like worship and pray, and worship and pray, worship and pray. And at the end of the night, because we love ice cream on Thursday nights, we're going to do ice cream on Sunday night. So after it's all done, all of our guests from other churches are here. We're going to have ice cream and just, enjoy a little bit about being together with that. But here's another thing that we're going to be doing as a group of churches in our valley. The pastors in our valley, we meet together regularly, and something we just kind of decided on in the last few weeks was this. For the month of June, so starting next week, for the month of June, we're going to commit to pray 3 times a day for 30 days for our community and for revival and for God to do what only He can do. And so we'll be leading up to that, giving you more information as we get closer. If you follow the blog, if you follow us on social media, we'll be giving you some hints and some reminders and some ideas. But we're just across the valley. We're just going to say as churches, we're going to be praying about this, all united together. Not just one church doing this off by the, no, all of us are going to be praying. And so the idea is that we're going to not set a time during the day, just like when you get up in the morning, pray about this. When you're around lunchtime, pray about this. Before you go to bed, pray about this. Just at least 3 times a day, kind of like Daniel in the Old Testament. As soon as he was told he couldn't pray anymore, you know what he did? He went right back to his room, kicked the door, the windows open, and prayed like he always did. Nothing's going to stop us from praying. And nothing can stop God when His people are praying. So we're going to join together with the other churches in our valley, and we're going to be praying for the entire month of June. Set that aside as a time to remember that and remember Him. Okay, so that's coming up. Also, speaking of June, starting next week, we're going back to the book of John. Now, if you've been with us for a while, last summer, we tackled the first half of John, and now we're going to tackle the last half of John. So we're going to start in John chapter 12 next weekend. If you want to kind of read ahead, you can kind of get into that with us. But let's get back to this series, Family Feud. We're wrapping it up this week. So last week, we were saying how we fight with our family. Mother's Day, we said, how do we fight for our family? And this week is healing family wounds. So this is a little heavier of one, and I'm just going to brace you for that. And maybe we all kind of in the room have different degrees of hurt and pain that have happened to us in our life. I just am praying that God will do something special and unique in each one of you. But let me start this way. I was thinking about this week. 22 years ago, we were renting the high school across the street for our Sunday services. So the only building we had was the little building next door. We gave our children's ministry that building, and we went across the street, and we did our worship services in the gym. Now, in order to have that arrangement, we had to bring all of our chairs, stage, everything, all of our sound equipment. And so we had a stage about this high, but it was portable, and then they had stairs that kind of locked into it. And one particular day, 22 years ago, I fell off that stage. I went to get down, and the first step wasn't locked, and I just went, woo, and just bang, smashed my knee into the ground, bled through my pants. Later that same day, no joke, I tore up my ankle, bad. And that was only 3 days after passing a kidney stone. So you're wondering why I remember that weekend, right? That was a painful weekend. And we understand pain, like we've all had it in different ways, right? We've understood this now. So let me just do a quick poll. You can raise your hands. How many of you have broken a bone in your lifetime? All right, man, most of you. That surprised me. How many of you have stitches? All right, leave them up if you have more than 30 stitches. Yeah, proud of it. Yeah. All right. How many of you have ever had an injury with a knife? Okay, now there's a follow-up question for this one. Was it in the kitchen or was it on the streets? Because I kind of, like when my little sister, when she was like 4 or 5 years old, somebody had given me a pocket knife and they'd given me a sharpening. So I sharpened that thing. And she says, is it sharp? And she reached out, and before I could show her how to go sideways across the blade lightly, she just goes right down the blade, just filleted her thumb, right? So that would count as a knife injury, right? Anybody ever been shot by a gun? We do have some people in our church who have. I didn't know if there's anybody in this service, or maybe you just don't want to raise your hand. That's okay too, right? Anybody ever have major surgery? All right, me too. I've had 2. One, I was in high school. I had knee surgery. The other one was soon after our second child. My wife encouraged this one. She calls it a procedure. I call it major surgery. So I don't expect everybody to get that, and that's okay. That's the way I said it that way. So we all have those kind of things, right? So we could all look back and we could say, car accidents and problems and, but there's a whole different kind of pain and wound that many of us carry that we just don't talk about. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand for these. Neglect, abuse, abandonment, divorce. There's a long list. And I don't need to be specific. I just need you to know this. I've specifically been praying this week that God would speak to you in a unique and personal and specific way during this time. I know I have like one voice, but God, by his Spirit, is able to speak to you and direct these thoughts with maybe what you need to hear. And some of you may not be carrying like heavy weight of heavy wounds, and I still think there's something you can get out of this too. And if it's really serious, like I'm not a psychologist, I'm just going to tell you right now, that's not my role, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But man, if you are wading through heavy stuff, I encourage you to find a really good Christian counselor to walk with so you can walk beyond this stuff, walk through this stuff and get on the other side. But I do want to spend some time talking about some things that God talks about often. And I've got 4 things, but I'm going to just say it this way. They're not 4 simple steps to heal your wounds. It's not like 4 easy things to do for a brand new life. But there are seriously 4 things that the Bible talks about often enough that we need to pay attention to, especially when it comes to this subject of healing family wounds. And so I kind of want to walk into it that way. And the first one is this. I just want you to embrace the idea of this, knowing your value even in the mess. Knowing your value even in the mess. And here's another way to say it. Knowing that you have worth even though you feel worthless. Does that make sense? I want you to know your value. I want you to know that you have worth even though you feel worthless, even though you're maybe it just still feels messy to you. I want you to understand that. I want you to understand what God is able to do and what he wants to do like in and through your life. A couple things I want you to see as we go through this. Listen to this. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception. Okay, let me just stop there. This goes on. But this is what I've discovered, both in talking to people and in reading. What I've discovered is there's a whole lot of people who've been on the receiving end of these wounds. Now listen to me carefully. And what happens so often, even though it happened to you when you were 3 or 12 or 18 or 30 or whatever it was, like this happened to you, there's something about this wound that makes you feel like somehow maybe it was your fault. right? We hear about this and the children of divorce and the children of abuse. Like if I just would have been more obedient, if I would have been more brave, if I would have been prettier, if I would have been, and like somehow it's like it's our fault that our parents split up, or it's our fault that this person did this to. So we get into this, and the reason I tell you this is because sometimes we just walk in the path of wicked. I was in Conway, Missouri, before I came here 36 years ago, so it's been like forever. Ben Franklin and I came here in the same year. No, I'm kidding. It just feels like forever. But before that, I was preaching in a little church in Missouri. I started there when I was in college. After I graduated, I continued there. I was there a little over 3 years. And one day I got a call from the high school. It was one of the girls from our youth group. And she called and she said, could I come up to the high school right away? Sure. So I go up there. They knew me at the high school. I did some substitute teaching there. Mostly just to get my connection with the students there. And the elementary, the middle school, the high school were all kind of in the same campus area. It was like the regional school for this farming area. Even though the town was small, the school was pretty good size. So I walked in and right away I said, hey, I'm supposed to meet with somebody. And is it okay if we have a room? And so they said, yeah, no problem. They gave me a room. And so the young lady from my church youth group and her friend, the three of us sat in this room. And her friend began to tell me what an extended family member had been doing to her, sexually abusing her. So we prayed. I mean, she's like a sophomore in high school. We prayed, got the authorities involved. I would say this, fortunately, this family member pled guilty right away, went to prison right away, didn't drag it out, didn't draw the pain out for the victim. But that was maybe one of my first moments of really walking with somebody through the kind of pain that some of you have carried, some of you know about. And the reason I point that out is just simply this. Instead of saying, maybe it was my fault, if I just would have, I just want to let you know. Sometimes there's just wicked people. So what Paul is doing here in Romans chapter 1 is he's literally describing the world when people turn their back on God. So let me just start over, and I'm going to read the whole thing. He says, their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning, and they disobey their parents. It's a little funny to me that this one's in this list of murderers and everything else, but disobeying their parents, they refuse to understand, break their promises, are heartless, have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Worse yet, they encourage others to do them too. You see how I pointed this out? There are people who are just evil. It's not your fault that this happened to you. You did not bring this on when you were 6 years old. It's like, no, evil people. But at the same time, I want you to understand your value even in the mess. Is there would you like to come help me? I need a young person up here. Come on, man. I promise you it'll be worth it. Just run up here. Stairs over there. Okay, stairs over there. Come all the way over here. All right, so I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Okay, so what's your name? Chandler. Okay, Chandler, come on over here. Come right here. Okay, what's this? $10 bill. You know what it is. All right, would you like it? Yeah, okay. What about now? Okay, what about now? What about what about now? Okay, there you go. Thank you. Thanks for coming up here. All right, give him a hand. He just made $10. Now, why did he still want it? I wrinkled it. I stomped. Why would he still want it? It's still what? still worth $10. It still has its value, right? Here's another way I want you to see this. Ever since I was younger, I started collecting $2 bills. I don't have some fancy collection. I just have a stack of them in one of my dresser drawers. So if you break into my house, they're in there. All right, so they're not in the safe or anything. But one of them is unique. This one, I took a picture of it. This one. Now, it's unique for a couple of reasons. One is it has red ink and a red seal. That's rare. And in 1953, when this was done, so this is old, 70 years old, and underneath of 1953, it has the letter C. That makes it also rare. So here's how the free market system works. I don't know if you know this. Free market system, it goes like this. Something is worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. So if you have a stamp, a rare baseball card, a rare 1966 Corvette, you can maybe guess at what it maybe is worth, but it's only worth what somebody's willing to pay for it. And now we know what certain things are worth because this is how much people have been recently paying for them, right? So I did some research. I got to tell you right now, man, I was excited. I'm just like typing it. Yeah, no, that's the one. It had a picture of it. And this is the signature. That's the, yes, everything's right. And I looked it up. This thing right now, I know this is going to blow you away. This thing right now is worth $9. Sometimes $8. Yeah. You thought it was going to be really exceptional, didn't you? Yeah. That's why it's just stuffed in a drawer. But if you think about it, that's a 400% increase. That's pretty good. Now, when it comes to the free market system, if somebody wanted this and it completed their collection and they say, I'll give you $1,000 for it, by the way, that would be gone. I would not have that. I would only have a picture of it, right? Because I don't think it's worth that much, but if they need it for their collection and they're willing to pay for it, now that's what it's worth, right? Track with me on this. What are you worth? And by the way, your value has nothing to do with what's been done to you. Your value has everything to do with the way that God sees you. Everything to do with the way that God sees you. Listen to this. For you know that God paid a ransom. This is what he's talking about us. He paid a ransom to save you from the empty life you inherited from your ancestors. He's just talking about sin. And it was not paid with mere gold or silver, which lose their value. It was the precious blood of Christ, the sinless, spotless Lamb of God. Can you let that soak in for a minute? He paid the price for you. The word in the Bible sometimes is he redeemed us. So like if you take, let's say you have something of value, maybe it's a baseball card, maybe it's worth a couple $100. You take it to a pawn shop and they give you money for it. If you go in 2 weeks later and say, I want my card back, they're going to require you now to pay for it. You go, but that's mine. No, not anymore. It's theirs, but you can redeem it. That's what that means. So that's why the Bible uses this word. He says, you used to be mine, but then sin came into the picture. Now we're separated, and then he bought us back, but it wasn't with silver or gold. What did he use? Precious blood of Jesus. That's how much he thinks of you. That's how valuable you are. Ephesians 1, even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy and without fault in his eyes. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. I love this last line. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure. Before he even made the world, he knew we were going to sin. He knew he was going to send Jesus to pay the price so that we could be adopted as family. And this whole thing gave him great pleasure. Why? Because he loves you. Because you're valuable to him. What's been done to you, I'm going to come back to this, but it hasn't changed your value. Don't ever forget that. Here's another thing. You probably saw this one coming when we were talking about this, but I don't want to take this lightly, and this is huge. Offering forgiveness even in the hurt. Offering forgiveness even in the hurt. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but when I've been out of town, maybe on vacation or something, and maybe I'm coming in on Lambs Canyon. This is where it really hits me the most. Coming in on Lambs Canyon, and you get that kind of the first glimpse of our valley. And I usually like out loud say it, home. A lot of people, they talk bad about our valley, but man, when I see it, and I hadn't been here for a week or two, just like home. And when we think home, like we think like peace. We think sleeping in our own bed. We think, man, we get to be in our comfy chair. We get to kick off our shoes. We get to walk around in our pajamas if we want to. It's like home, right? It conjures up all these good things. But not for everybody. For some people, when they hear the word home, it reminds them of hell. We don't always understand what somebody else has been through. But if the trauma happened at home, home isn't necessarily a good word to them anymore. So I want you to think through some stuff with me, but I want you to see this quote. He says, though time may calm us down and give us distance to see things more objectively, it simply isn't true that time heals all wounds. Some hurts grow worse over time, consuming those of us who have suffered them and separating us from the fellowship with God and one another that we were made for. Let me say it another way. Time doesn't heal all wounds. What you do with the time can heal the wounds. And God says what to do with that time is to learn how to forgive. I'm not suggesting that it's easy, especially given some of the stories that I know of, have read about, but the stories of people that I know and some of the things that they've gone through. So let me just walk through some things about forgiveness I want you to get. I want you to just think through these things. Forgiveness is not letting the offender off the hook. Like in the story I told you earlier about the young lady who was in high school and was a family member that had sexually molested her, that person went to prison. They needed to. Now, I hope that they repented and God got a hold of their life while they were in prison, but there were consequences they needed to live with. Forgiveness is not letting the abuse reoccur. You know, we've said this over and over throughout the years. Let me just say it this way. Let's say, for example, somebody's in a domestic abuse situation. And let's just say it's a lady and her husband beats her up when he's drunk or whatever. You can forgive him without walking back into the house and letting him do it again. Don't let it keep going. Forgiveness is not manipulating the situation to avoid pain. And so sometimes that's just like an emotional way that we try to work it, but that's not really forgiveness. Forgiveness does not start with feelings, it ends with them. If you've ever been truly hurt, you never said to yourself, man, I really feel like forgiving. Let's do this. You don't feel forgiveness at first. It's the process you work through. And this is what I want you to get. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. I've shared it before from my own experience. There's been times when I forgave someone, and then I realized a few months later I had to forgive them again. And a couple of years later, I had to forgive them again. Why? Because I could feel that bitterness creep back in. I don't want it there. Okay, God, I forgive him. I just release it. Like I'm not going to hang on to this. It's not my job. Like, God, this is your thing. I'm going to forgive. It's this process that we work through, and maybe we have to come back to from time to time. Another thing, Larry Osborne said it this way: forgiveness is a decision lived out as a lengthy process. It's pretty smart. He's just saying it's going to take time. It's not an event. It's like not one and done. It's this process, this journey we walk through. Here's another great verse. Colossians 3 says, make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, so you must forgive others. By the way, if you're taking notes, you might want to write down, I think it's like that whole chapter down through about verse 17. That is an amazing section. He's just saying, we're going to put on Christ. There's the right things we're going to do. And he ends it with, whatever you do, in word or deed, I want you to do it all, to the glory of God. I want you to do this in a way that's going to honor Jesus. But right in the middle of that whole section, he says, and here's a part of it. Got to be able to forgive. Got to be able to forgive. Here's another quote from a guy, I think it's Lewis Smedes. He says, forgiveness is God's invention for coming to terms with a world in which people are unfair to each other and hurt each other deeply. He began by forgiving us, and he invites us all to forgive each other. He invites us all to forgive each other. I want to give you a statement, and I think this statement will hopefully give you some help and some direction in this forgiveness process. And if this is something you're struggling with, you might need some help to work through some of this. But let me just give you this statement to help. Forgiveness with boundaries. Forgiveness with boundaries. So it goes back to that other list we had. We're not going to let the pain continue. We're not going to let the abuse continue, whatever it is, right? There's got to be some boundaries. Forgiveness without boundaries is called enablement. We don't need to let them continue on. And there may be consequences that they need that will ultimately turn their life around. They need the consequences. So forgiveness with boundaries, we're going to protect ourselves, protect our family, protect our marriage from whatever this other thing is or was that continues to creep into our life. And then I want you to see this. This is Ephesians chapter 4. He says, get rid of all bitterness, rage, anger, harsh words, and slander, as well as all types of evil behavior. Instead, be kind to each other, tenderhearted, forgiving one another. Look at this. Read it with me out loud. Just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. Okay? I want to thank both of you who read that with me out loud. Let's do it again. 1, 2, 3. Just as God, through Christ, has forgiven you. How do we forgive? Just as God did. How did he forgive us? Completely. He's not hanging it over our head. It was complete forgiveness. And so we can completely forgive somebody, but still have boundaries if that is still going to be a problem on their end, right? Sometimes we forgive and there's reconciliation and we both move on in harmony. It's like, it's amazing. But sometimes that other person's not in that place, but I can still forgive them because I need to. I don't need that bitterness, that rage, that stuff just stuck in there. I need to release that stuff. Okay? Another thing I want you to think about is this: discovering purpose even in the pain. Discovering purpose. So one of the things about pain is in the midst of it, we can't see any good. Like, what in the world could God do with this? Like, how in the world could he use this? How could he recycle this? Like, how could God do that? Well, he says that he does. And so I'm just going to encourage you this way. Even when it feels impossible, we're going to hang on with everything we got to the promise that he gives us. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, Romans 8:28. And we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. Now, this could be misread, and some people do. They say, God causes everything, period. No, God does not cause everything. God does not cause a person to rape another person. God does not cause a person to hit another person. God does not cause this kind of evil. He doesn't cause that stuff. This is what this is saying. God causes everything to work together. So he can take the pain, he can take the hurt, he can take the wound, and he can still bring good out of it. And so some of you have had enough time that you're able to look back and you can say, hey, I can see this. So let me give you an example, not from a family wound kind of an example, but from a wound example. One of my really good friends several years back had a major heart attack. And he came out of that, and about 2 years later, he said it this way. He says, I thank God for that heart attack. That heart attack got me right with Jesus. If it wasn't for that heart attack, I don't know where I'd be right now. That heart attack, the pain of it, the fright of it, the whole thing, like the surgery, the recovery, the process, all of these, he says, but all of that was for good. Like God used that to get my life back on track. And you can see that in some ways. And so sometimes you can see it. You can look back and you say, I can see the good that came even out of the wounds that I had. Some of the wounds, some of you are still thinking, I don't know. So I'm just going to ask you to believe that God can. Believe that God can. He can do this. Romans 12, verse 2 says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God, what's this word? Transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. What does he say? He can transform us. Here's another word, recycle. Recycle. You know what recycle looks like, right? I know these aren't from our neighborhoods. Ours look a little different, but I like the colors and it was nice and bright and I was able to use it. So we've got compost, we've got waste, and we've got recycle. So we know that this kind of stuff, we can put it back in the ground. Some of you are weird people, have gardens and stuff, and you take stuff and you make mulch this stuff and you spend hours working on it so you can put it back in the ground. So I don't know if you're weird, but I'm glad you do it because sometimes you share some of the things from the garden. So waste, that's what we call trash. That's what we call garbage. Can't do much with that. But this one's important. So when you think of your wound, here's what happens. Most of the wounds in our life create trash. But they don't make trash out of us. Did you get that? The wounds create trash that needs to be set aside, like taken out to the dump, buried somewhere. The wounds are trash, but we're not trash. God can repurpose us. God can recycle us. Like that's what God can do. I never watched this show on the History Channel. Anybody ever watch American Pickers? Okay, I've heard about it, and I was like, I don't know why, but it's like something I read like reminded me of this show. So I looked it up and I read about it. So I didn't even know this. I thought maybe it was like a farming show, like they're picking like oranges when it's ripe. I didn't know like until I got into it. And then I saw, oh, okay, I get it. These guys rummage through the stuff that everybody else thinks is trash to find something that's valuable. Isn't that the idea of the show? Like they find the stuff and maybe they clean it up. Maybe they repurpose it. Maybe they take something that, for this purpose it's done, but now here's a new purpose, right? And so they take this stuff and they find the value in it and they get it fixed up and then that's what God does. He has the eye for what's still valuable. And we talked about it earlier. Who's valuable? You are. The reason I wanted to bring this up twice, your value, is because for some people that's really hard to believe. I wanted to say it again. You might have some garbage in your life because of what was done to you, but that doesn't mean you're not valuable. God can work in you and he can repurpose your life and even repurpose that pain to bring good even to other people. And then I want you to see one more. And that's leaning on friends. And by the way, you're not alone. It's stinking hot in here. If somebody knows how, turn the air conditioners on. I should have said that like 30 minutes ago. Man, it's just burning up. But friends that sweat together, stick together. That's how I feel. It's like beautiful outside. And here it's like 1,000 degrees. I'm not the only one, right? Everybody's like going, no, you're not the only one. Okay, sorry. Anyway, back to this. Number 4, don't lean on them real close right now because you might stick, all right? But leaning on friends, because isn't that a beautiful sound? That's a good sound. It'll take just seconds. These things are huge, and it's going to be nice. All right, 4, leaning on friends, because we can't do this alone. I was reading in one book, and part of their therapy process for when somebody's coming out of a really difficult wounds from the past or whatever, they said you need to find 8 safe friends. And I was like, why 8? Why not 6? Why not 3? Why not 12? Whatever. Anyway, so they're just saying, no, this is what you need to do. You need to find 8 safe friends. But they didn't say where to find them. I mean, I get it. Like, we need friends that can support us, can pray with us, can encourage us, give us a quick, kick in the pants when we need it. Like, we need friends like that. We do. But where do you find those friends? Oh, you might expect me to say the church, and I will. But I also need to be super honest. Not everybody who comes to church is safe. Some of you have experienced that. There's enough scandals, enough problems going on. We know, like, evil happens even in churches. So where do we find 8 safe people? Now, there's no guarantee But I will tell you what I've discovered for doing this for like 30 years, and that's small groups. We have life groups. We have rooted groups. If you haven't been in one yet, we always encourage people to head for the rooted group first. Hopefully that rooted group becomes a life group. But what you discover with those 8, 10, 12, 15 people is that maybe you don't connect like on a gut level with everybody, but maybe there's 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 in that group, and you do connect with them. So you're adding to your list to get to 8, right? But it's in those kind of groups where we serve together, and we learn together, and we pray together, and we laugh together, and we eat together. We're doing life together. That's where you find people like this. People, not perfect people, but people headed in the same direction. Those are the people you want to be walking with. And the direction is Jesus. So yeah, we can find safe people. We can find the people for our list in church, but I would encourage you to dive into a smaller group so you genuinely get to know some people. And they get to know you. And then you can lock arms and do life together. Hebrews chapter 10 has this famous passage. It says it this way: let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works, and let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. You just, man, we need each other. We can't do this alone. I probably don't need to harp on that. But I have one more thing to say. It's not on the list. I want to talk to the wounder for a minute. And I don't know everybody's story in the room. I don't know your story online. But if you're the one that caused the pain in somebody else's life and you're wondering if God can even forgive you, I'll tell you, he can. And he does every day. Several years ago, I was on a trip back in Cambodia. One of the missions that we support and partner with, and we have since back in the 90s, is a mission that's training pastors and planting churches. And so when we're there, we spend 5 days with pastors from all over Cambodia. They come, and typically there's about 200 or so at each training event we do. And they come together, and they literally just camp out. We got dorms on the main campus where the big church is that we do all of this at. And they come, and they camp out there for the whole week. We feed them. We train them. 99% of them do not speak English, so all the training is done through an interpreter. It's hard to get your flow going every few words. You have to stop and let them say something. But I tell Christopher, he was here last summer, and I interviewed him. An amazing, amazing man. I always tell him when he's like interpreting for me, I always tell him, no matter what I say, tell them what they need to hear. So I don't know if he's saying what I'm saying or not. I really don't know. I don't care. He knows Jesus. He's telling them what they need, right? So one of these years, I think it was about 2012 to 14, somewhere in there, one of my trips, we stopped at a prison in Phnom Penh. In Phnom Penh, maybe you've heard of the killing fields. And Phnom Penh was the capital city where Pol Pot and his regime came in first. And they basically, there's no nice way to say it, they basically tried to kill everybody with an education. Some estimate from 2 to 4 million people they killed. They started in Phnom Penh. Any teacher, lawyer, businessman, anybody who wore glasses, you're done because they figure you can read. The guy who was in head of the killing camp in Phnom Penh, his name was Duke. Now, fast forward several years. This guy's responsible for thousands and thousands of people being killed. Fast forward several years. Christopher's over there doing a training. He doesn't realize that one of the guys sitting in the room while he's talking about Jesus is Duke. Duke becomes a Christian, is baptized, goes back to his village, starts a church. He becomes a pastor. It comes out later who he really is. And because of war crimes and that whole thing, they brought him in. But Christopher stayed in contact with him. Even though Duke was responsible for killing some of Christopher's relatives, Christopher, through the grace of Jesus, continued to pour Jesus into Duke. So he stopped in Phnom Penh and went to the prison where Duke was. This is Duke. That's me. You can't see around this whole area, but there was a guy walking around. I kept my eye on him. He was carrying a 12-inch knife. Back and forth from the kitchen he would go, but I'm just like, I'm sitting next to a guy responsible for killing, torturing thousands of people. And we had communion together. Because I believe that Jesus can forgive him just like he can forgive me. He gave his life to Christ. In the court, the war crimes court, which was televised around the world, they gave him the mic. By the way, Christopher got to talk at that as well. And he told people about Jesus. Duke, a worldwide broadcast. He says, what I did was heinous. What I did was horrific. And I deserve whatever this court wants to give me. If they want to kill me, I deserve it. But I found the grace of Jesus Christ. I don't know how that sits with you. You might think, really though? Would Jesus really forgive a guy like this? Yes. Yes, he would. Yes, he does. His grace is bigger than all our sin. Every single one of us. And so whether you're the one that is carrying the wounds that someone else did something to you and you're trying to sort that out like we talked most of in this lesson, or you're the one that brought the pain to someone else, I'm just going to tell you, man, God's grace is able to work through all of that stuff. And he can bring hope right in the midst of the pain. That's our Jesus. You're watching online, you have questions, you want to talk to somebody, you want to pray with somebody, just email us at office@community.cc or use the app. All of you here, if you have our app, you can just use that. Let us know your prayer requests, your decisions, or you can talk with somebody before you get out of here tonight. Let me pray for you. And if you want to pray with somebody, just make your way to the front. Or just hang out outside with some ice cream and talk with us out there. We don't have to do this alone. Let's pray. God, thank you for your grace. Grace to walk with us when we've been hurt. Grace to forgive us when we've caused the pain and everything in between. God, thank you, Jesus, for paying with your own blood for our sin. Not with silver or gold, but with your precious blood. God, be with the people who are processing the stuff that's happened to them. And I pray, God, that you would illuminate some of these things, that you would remind them that you're able to recycle that pain and give them new purpose. God, walk with them right now. Let them feel your presence like never before. In the name of Jesus, I pray. Amen. Love you guys. See you next week. Maybe we'll see you Sunday night. That would be awesome.